Welcome to the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best founders, CEOs, and investors to help you scale your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is a very special one. His name is Steven Freidkin, the CEO at Ntiva. Steven, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We will get back to the pod in 1 minute. Let me just tell you that I'm glad to announce that this podcast is sponsored by the web agency WebTech. WebTech are specialists on getting customers to companies. They are booking 250 meetings a month to their own sales team. And their business strategy is to teach other companies what they do for themselves. I'm very excited to announce that I've agreed with Pontus, the CEO of WebTech, a special advantage to our listeners. Our community have now access to a pre-designed suggestion on how your website could be improved and or free trials for both SEO and digital marketing. Oh, and by the way, we are working with them too, and I'm impressed by the results. You can do the same. You just need to go to trywebtech.com/Mike, trywebtech.com/Mike, and tech is without the H, just TEC, and tell them you are a listener of the show. Now, back to the pod. Yeah, your story is quite inspiring. So at this stage, you are kind of leading 800 people and 170 million in revenue, 2,000 clients across the US, 14 acquisitions. And I love your motto about we exist to grow each other. So you went through kind of a bootstrapping mode since 2015. You got invested by a PE firm when you were around 100 people. And then you started doing acquisitions and growing organically as well. And today, as I said in the beginning, you are at 800 people and 170 million. So the company was kind of officially founded in 2004, but you almost started it already in 96, 97. I will let you tell more about the story as an intro, but I think it would be nice to just highlight the amazing journey that you have and the pleasure that we have to have you here sharing with our audience and other CEOs that are scaling up their companies and top executives, how you did it. And so we all can learn from your story as well.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And I'll give the history briefly because I think the last 10 years is a little bit more apropos for the audience to learn about, scaling from 100 to 800
Exactly.
and beyond. Also, I appreciate all the kind words about me, but I'd be nowhere without our team here at Antiva. I mean, they've made this into the company that we are today. And, I'm lucky to be able to have really purpose behind the why of what we're doing and have a team that supports me so well in the day-to-day execution and really scaling of that concept. With that said, so kind of going all the way back in time, back in around 1996, I was in middle school, total geek, played with computers as often as I could get my hands on anything. Girls wouldn't pay attention to me in the classroom. I was bored with classes, so I found myself sneaking out of class often and going across the street to a CompUSA. One day I happened to be wearing a red shirt, which was the same color uniform that people who worked there would wear. And I was mistaken as an employee. I quickly told the person that I didn't work there, but was happy to help. And he continued to kind of explain his situation, and I helped him pick between a desktop and laptop.
Wow.
Very shortly after he made that buying decision, he asked me if I'd go to his home to set it up for him. I did a quick check to make sure that was a safe thing to do at my age. And turns out, I went from my parents' house on the bus to meet him in his home, set up his new device. After about 2 hours, everything was rocking and rolling, and he gave me a check for $75. As I walked out of that house, I was I couldn't even imagine the day where I was getting paid to do the thing that I actually love to do. Turns out, very lucky, that same person was the CEO of a large company at the time. And by the time I got back to my parents' house on the bus, on their tape-based answering machine, for those that remember that, there were already referrals for another couple of residential customers, also whom run their own businesses because of that person. So I immediately took those calls and got them set up. And then really through middle school and high school, I was working quite a bit with residential users in the DC metro area, helping them set up and kind of get support in their homes. When I was about 17 years old, one of those folks turned to me and said, "Hey, you've been dealing with my spouse and kids for the last 4 or 5 years now. That is hard as compared to my business. Would you be willing to help my business? I'm about to scale a mortgage company." And again, this was before the mortgage industry was frankly about to skyrocket. We could argue probably not the best thing for the economy or the industry, but nonetheless, there was about to be a lot of activity. This was in the late 90s. I wound up going in, learning a lot about line of business applications for the mortgage industry, helped get them set up and provided ongoing recurring support well before managed services was even a term. And the next thing I knew, because this industry was growing so fast, a loan officer would jump from mortgage company to mortgage company on whoever would pay another 0.25% of commission. And I was the kind of de facto DC based, leader of understanding how that line of business application worked. So through, at this point, the end of high school and as I started my college endeavors at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, focusing on accounting, actually, the business really began to scale with recurring revenue, wound up having about 40 mortgage companies and title companies that I was supporting quite regularly. By 2004, I'd say, the truth is for the folks listening to this, I was doing the best I could to manage all the classwork and everything that I was doing, commuting back and forth from College Park, Maryland to Tyson's Corner, where I was working most of the time, and, doing classes winter and summer and so on and so forth. And then I took a summer class. It was Marketing 101. I think I had, at that point, maybe 9 or 12 credits left. And in Marketing 101, I clearly wasn't paying attention. I was rushing in and out to get to these classes. I wound up getting a B. And I went, this is the opportunity cost of this is too high. I need to be focused on this business. This is what I'm doing. And that's when, we officially formed Antiva, gave a shorter name. Before it was Custom Computer Creators, a very long name. It boxed me into certain technology. I wanted a name we could define, a name that would be synonymous with phenomenal IT support. And, hopefully one day, we want to be a Q-tip, a Kleenex, a Google. We want that name to be synonymous with really the best of breed technology consultants and support that are out there. So really from 2004 all the way to 2015, the business continued to grow by word of mouth and referral. It wasn't really an intentional growth. It just happened, right? We did good work. Clients stayed with us. Team members stayed with us.
Right.
And it was all recurring. So once you had them, they were yours to lose.
Well,
And kind of woke up in 2015 when we were, I'd say early 2015, we were maybe 80 or so employees, $18 million or so of revenue. And couldn't keep my finger on the pulse of everything that was happening anymore. So I wound up elevating managers inside of the company to help kind of keep the trains running on time, for lack of a better term. And what I noticed at that point is a material energy difference inside of the company. Before, either people would run through walls because they were following me or because I asked them to. With the managers, it was like everybody did their proverbial 9-to-5 job. Things were okay, but it just wasn't the same energy and enthusiasm. I didn't like that. It wasn't for me. So I thought about it and I wanted to answer, do I want to shrink to 40 people, move to K Street in Washington, D.C. and support law firms in a 3-block radius? Or do I want to keep growing? And so I took money off the table and really reflected on this for myself to get in touch with what my intention was, what my why was. And I kept coming back to 2 experiences. The first was around, some engagements I would have with clients, and say this would happen maybe 30% of the time or so. I'd be at a local networking or philanthropic event. I would, go to the bar to get a drink, and I'd notice a client name on their name tag, and I'd introduce myself. Hi, I'm Steve with Antiva, and I'd hear something often enough that would sound like, oh, I know Antiva. Ever since we started working with Antiva, our technology has just worked. So we've been able to focus on growing our company. And like
Right.
that would bring, big smile to my face, ear to ear, and I'd have enough energy to work like another 2 weeks, 16 hours a day. What would happen even more often is with new team members. And I had a commitment that every new team member that came on, within 3 to 6 months of them starting, I'd sit down with them for coffee or lunch. And this was about 90% of the time I would hear from them as we sit down the same opening remark. And it would sound something like, in the 90 to 180 days I've been here, I've learned and I've grown more than I have in my prior job and or formal education. And that was like, stick me into a gas pump, fill me up with gas. I could go another 2 weeks, easily 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, no questions asked, with the energy I would get from it. And that was my moment, right? I was like, oh, we exist to grow each other. Technology is simply the accelerator of that growth. That is my purpose. That is what lights me up. That is my why. All the people over the years that we've created opportunities for, that they obviously took the initiative to jump through, but then they've, fundamentally changed their lives for the better, really brings joy to my life. And that became what Antiva was all about. I stood up in late 2015, shared with the company the purpose, shared where we would make some strategic investments to support the growth. Because if we exist to grow each other, we want to keep growing and scaling to make positive impact to as many people as we can.
Right.
The 3 areas of investment were quite simple. The first was around automation. So automate stuff up and running part of the job so that we could elevate our technical talent to do that which only they can do and help our clients grow, which in turn helps them grow. The second area of investment was around organic sales and marketing. At that time, we had none. Nobody knew who we were. And frankly, the deals we would close, they just were referrals. So we wanted to invest in marketing for brand recognition and sales reps who could qualify and close the right new opportunities. And then finally, at that time, there was already fragmentation happening in the market. We were what I thought was a small company at $18 million or so of revenue, but we were in the top, call it 400 employees, or excuse me, 400 companies of size that do what we do in the US of more than 35,000. It was kind of crazy. So it was highly fragmented. And we already saw some acquisitions and mergers happening in the space. So the third area of investment for us was going to be in doing acquisitions the right way strategically across the country. So long story short, shared that with the company. Next day, everybody was running through walls again. People understood what our purpose was, and managers could suddenly manage autonomously, understanding what the big picture was in mind. Super awesome.
Right.
So that's a little bit of the backstory. It ultimately leads into me looking for private equity as well. I'm not sure if it's helpful to the audience to hear, why I turned to private equity, but I'll leave that to you, Mike.
Absolutely. I think this is quite interesting. That's why I always like to share in the show, because sometimes not all our listeners listen to all episodes, but for the ones who are joining recently, only 4% of all companies in the US get to 1 million in revenue. Only 0.4% get to 10 million, and only 0.04% get to 100 million. So you are over 100 million at this stage, so which is 0.04% of the companies, which kind of makes sense of what you said, that at 18 million, you are already on the top 400 companies of the 35K companies in the space on your category. So it's quite impressive, and it shows how difficult it is to start a company, but it's so much harder to scale up a company and to be able to keep growing everyone in all the stakeholders, as you said. So did you feel any kind of plateaus? I think, did you feel that 18 million was one of the plateaus, of the growth plateaus that you faced? Because technically that's usually where people face the plateaus. Of course, this is on average. It depends from company to company, but 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100, that's typically where people have a hard time going to the next stage, and they need to reinvent themselves and to rethink the way they are leading the company, right?
Yeah. Look, Mike, there were definitely stages where, revenue,
Yeah.
we kind of stagnated for, months or a year or two at a certain level, and then had to make major adjustments to kind of get to the next
Right.
threshold. To me, as I reflect on the journey, the revenue in at least my business, which is a service-oriented business that is mostly recurring revenue, right?
Which is
In my
incredible.
particular business, it was more related to the employee headcount than it was necessarily to the revenue, though there is a relationship, of course, of the headcount to the revenue. So that's to
Right.
say that first piece of this journey that I described to you before I even knew the why, like that had to, we had to address that first. And so to me, that was really where I couldn't keep my finger on the pulse of everyone anymore and
Got
be
it.
the direct communicator with everyone. So that was kind of the first threshold. I can tell you, right now I'm blessed with 5 children and I have a chaotic life. If I was doing this all over again, it would be 25 people that I couldn't keep the finger on the pulse of with all of the other parameters, right? I hope that makes sense, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have a CEO that I'm a friend of that says that he also has a SMB company at home because he also has kind of 5 to 7 kids. So that's another kind of logistics, another kind of company that they need to manage. So yes.
Right. Yes, except it's somehow a not-for-profit, and I, can't deduct the expenses.
Exactly. In terms of complexity and logistics. But yeah, let's go to that new stage, right? So 2015, you kind of rethink about your purpose, what gives you energy, and you understand that really what gives you energy are the impact that you have on the customers and the impact that you have on your people, and that they have a better life because they choose to work at Ntiva being customers or team members. And you also decide what are your strategic bets for the future, automation, organic sales and marketing, and kind of leveraging the fragmentation of the markets and start doing strategic acquisitions. So I assume number 3 is very associated with the P decision. So how did you think about that? How did it go? Was it an opportunistic way? Was it a very deliberate kind of strategy? How did it all happen, right?
Sure. Again, end of 2015, people understand their purpose. Things are really moving quickly. I'm super excited. By the 3rd week in January 2016, I was coming home from my 5th business trip, meeting with different MSPs that I had gotten to know over the years across the country, talking about merging, right? And what that would look like and how we can enter new regions together and be stronger and better together. And I get home and my wife is on the floor of our family room. She's fine, but she had just put our 2 kids to bed at the time. I sort of wave to her hello, walk into my office and get back to work. And it's, pretty late at night, and she comes into my office and she looks me square in the eyes and says, if something doesn't change, you need to sell this business. And, thank God I didn't respond to her in that moment, because this business was my identity, frankly, before I met her from, my adolescence, right? Like, this is all I know. So I paused for a moment and I, again, had a moment of reflection for myself. And I said, well, what is making it so I can't compartmentalize work and home? Like, I got home and I felt this, I had to get back to things. And I mean, here's the truth, Mike, and hopefully this doesn't get too much out on the interwebs, but I'm not the best engineer. I'm not the best leader. I would say my superpower is screwing things up only once. And trust me, I've screwed a lot of things up, but I tend to only, screw up once on certain things. And then I like to think that I have the courage to share where I screwed up with others so that they can avoid screwing up as well. And, internal to Antiva, we call this making original mistakes. Mistakes are fine, but original mistakes only.
Love it.
So understanding that, what was happening to me in that moment is I was scared to death of making a mistake. I felt good about automation, but organic sales and marketing, investing in that, doing an acquisition, if I screwed up in either of those scenarios, I would eat up all of the profit of the company, and it would take me a long time to come out of that. And I'd be worried about paying my mortgage. I'd be worried about taking care of my family. So this fear was making it so I was unable to really be present with my family. So that's when I made a choice to look for private equity, to find a partner who could take some of the risk off the table for me and convert that to some dollars so I could have some level of security for my family going forward. Right. And in an ideal world, in addition to being a culture fit, believing in my purpose of existing to grow people, I also wanted somebody that had experience building organic sales and marketing from nothing and doing strategic acquisitions. So maybe there was some mistakes and experience I could learn from them that I could avoid. Right. I actually wound up interviewing 24 private equity companies on my own. I had no investment banker. I was scared. I actually had just joined YPO at the time. And one of the things that I heard from my forum, which is a very close group of CEOs in much bigger companies than I had at the time, they're like, be careful with private equity. They're all full of shit. If they tell you something, they're just trying to sell you. Then when a bad quarter comes, they're gonna look at spreadsheets and tell you to cut bodies. And if you don't like that, they'll get rid of you as well. And so I had all of these like inputs in my ears. So I really took this seriously, and I went out and I wanted to find the right partner, right? Like it wasn't about maximizing the dollars. It was about making sure I met all of those objectives in a meaningful way. Again, 24 firms on my own, narrowed it down to 4. Once I had it narrowed down to 4, I called every CEO of their current and past portfolio companies and asked the question, what was it like on a bad quarter? Only one of those 4 companies ultimately did what they said they would do and were the right partner. And even on a bad quarter, they supported the management team and they kept a focus on people. That was my first private equity sponsor. That was Southfield Capital. We wound up closing with them in October of 2016. From October of 2016 until January of 2022, we completed about a dozen acquisitions, and we grew from, again, $18-20 million of revenue to about $85 million of revenue, and from about 100 employees to, I would say at that time, about 400. So really sizable growth with them. They were great partners. And then in January of 2022, I wound up going to our second capital sponsor, which is PSP Capital. Now, as it relates to them, because I was already dealing with a lot of other people's money at the time, right? I had to go through an investment banker-led process so I wouldn't get sued by shareholders for not maximizing their equity value, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, I had been connected to PSP Capital, and ultimately their main investor, which is Penny Pritzker, previously, and I wound up building a really good relationship with her where I got to know her. It was really an appealing idea to have one limited partner instead of, in the case of my prior experience, 70, where, investment decisions needed to go through a lot more hurdles and hoops. And as I got to know Penny, what was really special is while, of course, we want to get an extraordinary return on investment and do phenomenal, that was just one of the criteria that she had. She is fortunate to have wealth from a multitude of sources. And at the end of the day, she wants to leave a legacy behind as well of creating meaningful jobs and opportunities in this country. As we started talking about our different, why, the why behind what I'm doing, the why behind what she's doing, there was a tremendous amount of just alignment. And I knew that this was the right partner to work with. Now, if only it were that easy, because then I had to go through an investment banker-led process and all the rigmarole associated with that, and very stressful and time consuming and distracting, to be blunt. But at the end of the day, we got through all that and wound up, getting fair market value for the exiting investors and new support going forward starting January of 22. We've now been partnered with them for about 2.5 years. It's been phenomenal. We completed 2 smaller acquisitions with them at first. And then just recently in April of this year, we completed the first of its kind in our space, which is one private equity platform acquiring another. So in April of this year, we acquired another private equity backed player who was doing their own series of roll-ups, and they did 10. This was a relationship that I had worked on for a number of years. We had shared similar core values. We have similar target customer profiles. We are in different geographies, so the industrial logic of expansion that we get from this was really good, and we'd be able to apply our organic sales and marketing engine on it on top of it. So we closed that in April of this year, which was, about a 70% increase in our size. We're still very actively working on integrating and putting this together. As always, there are challenges that go along with the opportunities and excitement, but we're all learning and growing from it. And we're excited for really changing this industry for the better and being one of the only platforms that is focused on more than just generating the highest EBITDA possible, but actually leaving a legacy behind and creating jobs and meaningful opportunities for people in this country.
Yeah. Congrats. Very, very inspiring, Steven. Again, so much to follow up on. But let's start with kind of that story that you start, feeling that you need help to keep running the trains, as you use that expression. And when you get back home and you have that conversation with your wife, something that I was really surprised at when we had our pre-call and I asked you how many direct reports do you have, was your answer, right? That you have 3 direct reports: your president, your CFO, and your chief strategy officer that helps you with M&A, and your executive assistant, of course, to support you, which I found, wow, this is a huge level of discipline. And you said this is on purpose. I'm always trying to work myself out of my job, right? And kind of hats off for the CEO you are, because that's a lot of my job with CEOs, and 3 direct reports. I need to assume, especially at this size, it's almost impossible or super rare to say. Could you elaborate more on that? Because I think it would help other CEOs to listen from you, kind of in the YPO spirit, in the EO spirit, and so on. Why this is important, right?
Sure. And look, remember, my purpose is existing to grow each other. That includes myself, right? Yeah. And so the way that I found the most success of doing that is entering every year with intention to work myself out of the job that I had been doing previously. And the goal that I have with that, and by the way, I've been doing this for years and years now, I still manage to have a job every year, right? Is it elevates and supports other leaders in the company to now grow themselves, and it challenges me to do things that I haven't done before and really operate at my highest and best use for the organization as well. Look, I mean, I'm also, for what it's worth, talking to the audience here, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I have extreme ADHD. I've just learned how to sort of channel it and manage it. And so I have shiny object syndrome, right? Like, I will get bored. I am not a maintainer. I am a builder. I like doing new and different things. I like being challenged. As soon as I started to learn what makes me tick, I stopped fighting it and I started to lean into it. And, for better or worse, I've been very lucky insofar as I did achieve the goals that I wanted to with the original financial sponsor, to take significant financial risk off the table for myself. I obviously am still heavily invested in this business, but having done that, it really took the pressure off of me to have to have that job security. And when I did that, what it wound up doing with my leaders is it really showed them the way. It showed them that I'm not trying to create a fiefdom. I am trying to support and develop them. And then they started to trickle that down. Now, I say this, and we are nowhere near perfect, right? When we were 200 people, that was way more effective than today at 800. And what we're having challenges right now is making sure all of that cascades downward. We get it happening in pockets of the organization, but they're still missing pieces. And over time, we have to break that down. And I think it happens with time. It happens with trust, really, because a lot of these people, especially who are acquired, can hear me say what I'm telling you right now, but until they experience it themselves,
Right.
they're hesitant, they're cautious, they're scared, right? And so, there may be more to unpack here, but that's kind of why I do this. And I'll tell you this too. I hope that I'm perceived as a good leader, right? Many years ago, I realized I couldn't be liked by everyone. I'm not looking to be liked by everyone.
Yeah.
I'm looking to be consistent in my messaging. I'm looking to be consistent in my actions and hopefully respected, right? So people should know what they're getting from me. But understanding everything I just told you, I'm not a great manager, right? Like, I am not the person that's going to, help go through all of the appropriate steps to work one-on-one with a person every day to give them the support and attention that they need, because I'm all over the place. So it would be doing a disservice to my team and our company if I kept 15 direct reports like I had 15 years ago, or really 5 years ago, to be honest, and kept kind of trying to do all the other stuff that I'm doing and give them attention. Then there's no way they would be taking my examples as a leader and putting them down. Like, they would see I'm busy, I can't make the one-to-one, I can't properly write a 555 for your career development and advancement, right? But now with the smaller ones that I have, even though they may not need that same level of attention, I really try to spend the time on it, communicate appropriately, do the write-ups, etc., to lead by example. But I just could not find myself doing that effectively. And frankly, every year that goes by, I want to get even less direct reports.
Yeah. That is great, and that's incredible, the amount of self-awareness that you have. I think that's super important for the role, because definitely as CEOs, we are the bottleneck of growth of our companies, and we need to assume our responsibilities. And usually it's much easier to blame our direct reports, to blame our teams for not being able to get. You never did this on this call. You even have done the opposite, which was to give the tribute to your team when I congratulated you for the amazing journey you did so far. Something also important is, as we talk as leading our teams, is kind of managing up and also building those strong partnerships with our investors, right? So, and especially, as you said, with this kind of builder mentality, this founder entrepreneurial mentality, it can seem that we are in a cage, that we are in a prison, that we kind of are slaves of those EBITDA targets and those EV targets, and that we need to, fill the metrics that the PE mandate needs to work with. And of course, that's also their business, right? We need to align the business interests. But at the same time, you have kind of that intuition and that clarity of vision that you want to do certain investments that will create value in the future. And in the short term, you can have some bumps in terms of EBITDA targets, in terms of revenue targets, that will then be compensated by, we hope, through the investments. The investments are always risky, in a higher revenue and higher EBITDA and higher EV, or enterprise value, for the ones who are not familiar with the term. So how are we able to, to align those interests, to communicate with our investors, especially in the way that the founder speaks on an emotional way and in a very intuitive way, and the investor thinks in a very cold and rational and numbers way that typically there is already a disconnect there. Because if the founder would really think just about numbers, they would never start the company, right? Because typically when they start with a belief, and the belief needs then to happen. So if you are just looking to the Excel sheets, you would never start anything because the numbers just don't match, right?
Yes. So, look, there's a lot there. So
Yeah.
let's start with like, and you've already heard this in the story, so I'm not going to repeat it. Finding the right partner is super important, right? So first, being clear with yourself on what it is you want. Do you want the maximum dollar amount and to get the heck out of here, be done? Do you want support growing to the next stage? Like,
good point.
Do you want to be the leader of that? Do you want to be, just somebody that works, on the board at some point? You need to figure out what your intention and your goals are. Once you know what that is, then you need to do the right diligence to find the right partner that will support those goals, because they are out there. Then chances are, even with the right partner, to your point, we can't ignore the EBITDA, the revenue, all the targets, the covenants, all the stuff that comes along with taking outside capital, right? It's not like you can be, free of that, no matter who you're getting that capital from. It always comes with strings, right? So, it's about learning. And again, I'm a master at making mistakes and learning from them. But it's about learning the rules of the game, right? And that's what I did early on with Southfield. And I learned oftentimes on my own, but I was also blessed with having partners there that would pull me aside and share with me. They really believed in me as a founder and leader of the company. And so they would help me understand the rules that I had to work within to drive success. So just learning that as we went, I can't ignore EBITDA. I can't ignore these targets or these covenants or these objectives. But what I can do is start to use that, not only language, but those goals, understand where we're trying to go, and then show a plan of how we're going to get there. And really, to me, it was important to have partners that really was supporting the long term of the business, not the short term. Because we weren't just going to rush to get to the next buyer and then move on from there, right? Me and our leadership team would continue to be part of that journey going forward. So we really set those expectations early on with our partners, and our partners did the same with us. And it wasn't easy, but we got we got good at this, right? So as an example, it's very clear when you're working with private equity, especially our first group that was typical private equity with 70 external LPs, a fund that has a lifespan of 4 to 7 years. I knew in the first 1 to 3 years, we can make some investments, we can make some bets, we can put EBITDA as the goal on hold. But on the back half of that investment period, I knew that they needed to see that grow, and it needed to tell the story to maximize the enterprise value that they'll get for their shareholders as we move on to the next group. And so again, instead of just, I don't know how to say this, so I'll be blunt. Instead of the bullshit game of let's pretend like we don't know what's happening here, let's understand the rules of the game, embrace what's happening, and be honest and transparent with one another, right? Hey, let's make these investments here. Let's yield the results here. Let's move to the next transaction. And oh, by the way, as we're doing that, against investment banker advice, I'm talking to the new potential sponsors and telling them the same thing. This is what we did. This is why we're going to do it again with you, right? And really getting on the same page up front. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a certain way that we also say a lot in VC is you need to understand the game you are getting into before you start the game. So if you realize that the game is not for you after you commit to join the game, it's too late, and you might have killed the company in a certain way or killed your your future, because it will aid your job until the end, and we might need to find a strategic exit that typically will not be the best for you as a founder as well. So it's really, really important to understand what we are committing to, and to understand the rules of the game. And only after that, okay, this aligns with my rules as well, right?
Yeah. And look, Mike, I know we've got a limited amount of time, but like for the benefit of the audience, let me share like at least two very quickly of my original mistakes that hopefully you all could avoid. So as I went into my first turn with Southfield, I was very debt averse, right? I was the son of an accountant. I went to school for accounting. I grew up with the concept, if I cannot pay for it with money I have, I cannot have it, right? So as I go into this first relationship with Southfield, I'm very worried about debt. I'm very worried about covenants. I'm very worried about all of these things. So I asked them to, as much as possible, let's leave the debt as low as possible so we have flexibility. Well, what did I do there? I mean, they were probably high-fiving themselves after they hung up the call with me, right? They're like, oh my God, well, this is what we're going to do, right? So, in a relatively small transaction size, they only took 2 turns of debt on the business when they typically would take 4 or 5. They put the rest of it in as equity. So what did that do to the cap table? I wound up owning about 20% of the business after that first transaction, where if I had just done it in the model that they wanted to do it, all dollars would be equal, and I would have owned about 40% because they would have used more debt, right? So learning how to use debt intelligently is something I learned the hard way, and it cost me tens of millions of dollars. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two, and they were not wrong, right? So in their hold, they had been really great partners. They brought opportunities of acquisitions for us to do. And there were a couple of acquisitions where the math was extraordinary, right? We're talking $2 million EBITDA businesses on $4 million of revenue. It's like almost too good to be true in our industry. It's impossible. Like best of breed is 15, 18%. Too good to be true. But like because of that breakdown, we could buy it for say 5 times. And let's just say conservatively, we're worth 10 times, 12 times. Okay. Mm-hmm. The value creation on that, even if I had to go and say, oh, it's going to take an extra $600,000 to improve the way the business works, and it's not going to be as profitable going forward, et cetera, it still makes a lot of money on paper. And in the example I'm giving you, and there were a couple like this with slightly different variations in my first journey, it was one where culturally there wasn't alignment either, right? Like these were people who were proud of how inexpensively they could deliver service and how they could squeeze every last ounce of profit out of a rock, and how like it was really the owner and his number 2 that did all the work. And there was sort of like a supporting staff, but they kept them as lean as possible. They billed extra for everything they possibly could, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't have enough experience to be like, this isn't going to work out well, right? Because what I heard back is, Steven, even if it doesn't work out well, you've got so much room to still make this highly accretive. And so I said, fine. So here's what happened, right? They got the benefit, right? It was distracting. It was difficult. There were a couple of deals like this, but in their turn, they still got accretion from that. To this day, though, I'm still cleaning up messes that hurt our culture, that hurt our reputation in certain markets as a result of these poor cultural fit organizations that had different target customer profiles. So now what I know is I can bring up to them like, hey, while this may show some short-term accretion, here is how this plays out over time, and I cannot in good conscience do this deal, right? And so now I've learned how to communicate these things, and I just wish I had the confidence and experience to be able to communicate that in language they would understand early on, as opposed to being, emotional at first, and then, basically then just throwing my hands up and going, okay, we'll see what happens. I'll do my best, right? both of which were very immature reactions now that I think back on my career, and they're not things that I'll let happen again.
Yeah. You provided so much value with these two original stories that now that we are coming to an end, instead of asking another portfolio of questions, just, is there anything else that you'd like to share that you think it would be really relevant for any other founder, CEO that is scaling up their businesses from 100 to 1,000 people? I know that there is different stages there.
I guess, I brought this up before. I want to say it again. Like, know what you want and why. Understand your intention and live that intention, right? It's so easy to, be motivated, one day by one thing and the next day by another. Like, you've really got to get clear on that intention. So I think that's, that's super important. The other thing, if you're like me, this business is my life and it's all a people business, right? So the relationships, the connections with the people that are in the business are very intertwined in my values, right? So this is to say, I'll tell you, for years and years, we exist to grow each other. We all get that. But when someone would quit or go somewhere else to grow, I would feel like awful. But then I realized, wait, growing people does not necessarily mean growing them in your organization. If they grow out of your organization, that still achieves the mission. So that, to me, helped with some of my internal struggles with that. Yeah. And then similarly, and these sound combined, but I want to separate them. The people who can get you to certain levels may not be the people to get you to the next ones. And having early and clear, what I call carefrontational conversations, right? So it's coming from a place of care, but being direct, having these conversations, understanding, that at some point we're going to need someone different to do a role, and there may be different roles in the company. And if that's not right for you, then we'll support you going somewhere else. You got to do that. And when you know, and you've always got to be planning for that if you're scaling, right? The CFO that gets you to 100 people is not going to be the CFO that gets you to 500 or, 50 million to 100 million, 100 million to 250, 250 to a billion, right? These are different levels of folks or different experience sets. I don't even want to say levels. And so making sure you have the right person in the right seat is super important. So the more of that you can do, the better.
Yeah. And just the last one to wrap up the show. What's next? Is it, of course, we exist to grow each other. Is it the kind of the half billion kind of milestone? Is this the 250 million, as you said? Is it much more than that?
Yeah. Look, it's we want to be the best MSP the world has ever seen, and have lived our mission of growing people. So what has happened and what will continue to happen is we'll grow, we'll get to a point where that mission is sort of being compromised, and we'll have to pause. We'll plateau for a minute, we'll regroup, we'll figure it out, and then we'll keep growing. My goal is to maximize the positive impact we can make on this world, create jobs and meaningful opportunities for people, get extraordinary financial results for all stakeholders, not just our investors, right? Slightly better than average for every one of our constituents. And I want to keep going, right? Like, I want to keep doing this and I want to keep growing. And it doesn't need to be me at the helm, right? But what I want is I want to have left a positive impact on this world from this company, even if my name is never associated with it again. And be proud of the opportunities and the impact that we've left behind for the people and the communities that we serve. And I'm going to keep doing that for as long as I can.
Steven, and you need to come back to share a bit more about the last deal that you made. That was really a huge one, but it's impossible to cover it all in a single show. Steven, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure, and congrats for everything that you have done.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mike.
And to our community, thanks for being there. We keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life easier as you scale up your company. See you soon and keep scaling.